everybody, it's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to begin a new discussion on sin and virtue on the ChangeGrid. And so more than anything, this is going to be an exercise in you guys figuring out where on the ChangeGrid certain behaviors are likely to live. And this came from a little article that I read long ago about using the 7 deadly sins and the 7 heavenly virtues as the foundation for a coaching approach of all things. And I thought, well, maybe this is specifically about some sort of like spiritual coaching or faith-based coaching, that kind of an approach. No, it was just coaching in general. And they were talking about that pretty much if you look at the things that cause most people most problems, it's going to attach to one of these 7 deadly sins. And if you want to explore the corrective approach, you would look at the corresponding virtue. That brings things back into balance. And so I thought, well, this could be a very interesting exercise. Now, I have a theory, and I have purposely not spent a lot of time thinking about this because I'd like to be this like a shared discovery. But in fact, I'll do it as a question. Thinking about danger zones, healthy areas that aren't in the center of the ChangeGrid, and the center of the ChangeGrid itself. So think about those concentric circles, if you will. So the center of the ChangeGrid, the next kind of area out in a gigantic circle around the center of the ChangeGrid, and then all the way out to the danger zones. Do you think there's going to be any predictable locations we could make about sins in general and virtues in general? What might you think we're going to find as we start looking at these?
Well,
Brian, you're all broken up.
Ask a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Kind of. You're kind of all choppy.
Oh, okay. I probably should log back in. What's the definition of sin, or is there a definition?
Oh, we're going to be going through that. This actually comes from very, what do I say, traditional religious thought. They've come up with that. You can read the whole history of how it all came to be, but I'll share with you guys what the 7 contemporary or traditional deadly sins are and what the virtues are as well. Yeah, we're getting lots of crazy feedback. So if you guys will kind of mute your lines, maybe it's just we're getting some feedback from one particular line. But yeah, so there you go. We'll find out. All right. So So with that, yeah, go ahead, Brian. You've muted your line. Pamela, go ahead and mute your line for just a second. Let's see.
Okay. Now I have a thought on this topic.
Yes, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, my thought is that this is just like off the top of my head. Danger zones would be more likely to include sin, and the central position would be more likely to include virtue.
Right. So cultivating virtue should serve as a way to move more central on the ChangeGrid. And when the sins come into play, then we're going to be in one of these danger zones. Now, I don't know about every sin there is that's out there, but I do know that this idea about 7 deadly sins has been around forever and then some. So I'm going to share those with you next. By the way, you might find it very interesting to know that there is absolutely zero mention of the 7 deadly sins in the Bible. So these were actually things that were created by theologians, by philosophers, by writers, and there is a very extensive history behind all this, but it does not appear as such in the Bible at all. So these are considered to be the 7 deadly sins, and the 7 deadly sins tend to be normal behaviors taken to an extreme. And I'll go through each one of them and give you guys its definition as they've kind of come up with it. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a basic background to it. So here we go. So the 7 deadly sins, also known as the capital vices or cardinal sins, is a grouping and classification of vices within Christian teachings, although they are not mentioned in the Bible. Behaviors or habits are classified under this category if they directly give rise to other immoralities. According to the standard list, they are lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride, which are contrary to the 7 heavenly virtues that we'll get into a bit later. These sins are often thought to be abuses or excesses of natural faculties or passions. For example, gluttony abuses the natural hunger for nourishment. Now, the moment I started reading that these are actually excesses or abuses, I kind of suddenly envisioned a continuum. And while the deadly sin might be describing one extreme along that continuum, there must be another extreme along the continuum, and even more importantly, a whole bunch of places in between. And so I thought this should be a very good exercise in not only identifying where these things might live on the change grid, but what are the little subtleties, nuances, variations on each one of them, and where do they plot on the change grid? So can we actually find any sort of a continuum on the change grid? Okay, so any thoughts about this before I kind of launch into lust? Anybody? Nope. Feel free to unmute. Brian, you've just
Yeah,
unmuted. Go right ahead.
that's why I was asking about. Yeah, I was going to say that's why I was asking about the definition, because the sin comes from a root word meaning without impeccability.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see how you can take those words and they can live in specific spots on the grid, but I can see how without control or the capacity to regulate,
Yes.
they will move far out grid, like and probably rapidly.
Yes. And that's where I also think it'd be interesting to understand what are the neurotransmitters that are involved in moving from a normal natural behavior into one of these extremes. So, because somehow or another, this is all being driven by whatever's going on inside of our own thoughts and minds and spirits, as the case may be. Brian, I love having you on the call. I think you need to sign out and sign back in to see if you can get a cleaner line coming in, because you got some serious feedback going on there. Okay, so anyway, so let's go ahead and talk briefly about lust. Now, when you think back to your original ChangeWorks training, we do talk about lust as being one of the core emotions. And anyone remember what level of tension it's the core emotion for? So where does it align? Lust is associated with which of the core emotions? Or scratch that. Lust is associated with which of the levels of tension? And you can either unmute and tell me, or you can type it over if you want to, whatever you feel so inclined to do. Anybody, where does lust go on the change grid?
Would it be out grid?
It is slightly out grid. That's certainly true. Let me throw up a diagram. See if
a little bit up and a little bit out.
A little bit up and a little bit out, which in fact would put you into power stress. And the core emotion we find in power stress is lust. Lust is, it always makes the audience giggle because our audiences are just a bunch of grown-up school children. But nevertheless, they giggle because their mind limits lust to sexual desire. But lust is a two-part formula. Lust occurs whenever you truly desperately want something. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, but whatever it is, you truly desperately want it. But at the same time that you desperately want it, you have a giant question mark, a doubt, an insecurity about whether or not you can actually have it. So if you really wanted something and you believed you could go and have it, you could go and get it, that's not what lust is all about. That's what a goal is. But when you really, really want something and you wonder if you can get it, you doubt your abilities, you wonder if you're worthy, maybe that's the issue that's going into play. There's another dynamic going on that creates this question mark, this little bit of doubt that comes along with it. So that's the lust, wanting of something, but at the same time wondering whether or not you can have it or will have it, or whatever it might turn into as far as language in your own head goes. Now, because that's associated with power stress, there also tends to be a sense of urgency that's associated with lust, because you don't just want it. When do you want it? Think about that. Edie, you're unmuted, so you get to answer for everybody. You want it,
Okay.
and you want it when?
Now,
Now. This is it. There's a sense of urgency around it. I want it now. And so there is this drive to be to have that what do they call it, immediate satisfaction of one's desires. What do they call that? Instant gratification sort of a thing goes on there. Now I'll give you the definition of lust that's on our little working list here. And by the way, I just went to Wikipedia because I find Wikipedia tends to be simple enough, and because people can contribute to the writing, I find it to be something that is at least a decent starting point. And from this point, if you felt like doing a deeper dive into it, you certainly could. Brian's back. Allow Brian to talk. Hey, Brian, welcome back.
Hi, how do I sound?
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just had a really bad line there for a reason. Okay, so let me give you the definition of lust. Lust, or lechery, is intense longing. It is usually thought of as an intense or unbridled sexual desire, which may lead to fornication, including adultery, bestiality, and other sinful sexual acts. However, lust can also mean other forms of unbridled desire, such as for money or power. Henry Edward Manning, no idea who he is, says the impurity of lust transforms one into a slave of the devil. There you go. All right. So then this goes on, talks about Dante's writing in Purgatory and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, anyway. So where do you think someone who really, really lusts after something, unbridled desire for money or power, where do you think that might actually live on the change grid? I'll give you a composite to work with. Thoughts around this? Now, you guys have already said you think that lust is a little bit out-grid and a little bit up-grid. So
is it even more out-grid?
Well, that's the, I like the words you've said. I'd like you to change the tone with which you've said them. So it isn't so much a question, but a statement. Own it. So what do you think? Lust.
It's out-grid.
I think it's going to live between power stress and being very far out-grid. So anyone want to throw out, why do you think there might be a little continuum there to be looking at?
Because it's exploratory, I would think, right? Because it's exploratory, like you're exploring something, like you have a passion to do something.
Right. And so I guess when I'm thinking about that, do you think that's, why won't this let me write anything? Do you think that is being driven by, I don't want to give it away too much. Think about what's happening in the driven driver mindset versus the driven expressive mindset. So where do you feel, if you look at these three, I'll change the background image for you guys. If I said lust is likely to occur in the driven expressive, the expressive driver, and the driven driver, how might that lust change based on which of those three you might be in?
The driven driver?
The driven driver, go ahead.
Yeah, it just feels like there's more urgency, there's more need. It's like you can't live without it. Isn't it just magnified?
It seems to me like it has to do with how likely you think you're able to get it.
Okay. All right. So
the doubt is gone. The doubt is gone.
The doubt is gone. The doubt is gone. And so building on what Pamela just said, so the doubt is going to go up as someone plots further up grid. I mean, I imagine I could also say that if I'm in a life or death situation, I'm as far up in stress as I can possibly be. I might in that moment be lusting for someone to save me.
Right.
But,
yeah. But not likely lusting for power or money or sex.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, I just need a life ring, somebody. But so I guess that energy is still present, but it's in that driven expressive because it's that driver element that's coming into play, that's saying there is something that I want, and I want it because I want it, and I want it now. Now, the driven expressive has a doubt about whether or not they can get it. And how do I know that? Because look at how they're rating their ability
Right.
to do that. So it's only, well, it's a moderate on the low, a moderately low, a lowerly
Well,
moderate.
so if you took it just from the sexual desire,
Mhm.
part of it could be the messages you're getting from the other person.
And that's certainly true because it's interesting if you're getting the right signals, or if you are finding a way to make the money that you want or to have the
Right.
acquisition you want. What does that do to your perceived ability?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
going to
If
go.
you, yeah. Or you
Mhm.
might say, oh, but to get that kind of money, I have to do this, or to get that, I have to do that.
Mhm,
So there would
right.
still, so it'd be still more things that you would have to do personally. But the more you have those things, the more you have access to whatever you need
Mhm.
to get that money, the closer it's going to go to driven driver.
That's right. And so, in fact, let's go ahead and look at the engagement rings for just a second. So, where we just were, that person who is the driven expressive is right here. So, a whole lot of upgrade awareness and a lot of upgrade intention. And doesn't that resonate? I want it. I want it now. I'm
Yeah.
going to go and get it. But they don't necessarily have what it takes to go and get it. And so, as they move to the driven expressive, to illustrate what Pamela just said, well, now they start to notice things or do things, gather things. They're engaged now in doing whatever it takes to actually make that all happen. Their ability went up, their perception of their ability went up, perhaps their ability went up in fact. And so that's changing. Well, then you get out to this driven driver. What's the driven driver's mindset around around lust, around wanting something?
Going for it. I'm
They're
going
going
for it.
for it. And see, and I think that's the real difference. It's like lust plus arrogance comes into play. They want it because they deserve it. They want it no matter the cost. They want it no matter what the impact is on other people or other situations or whatever the case may be. So I kind of see that as the move goes from being a driven expressive through an expressive driver through a driven driver, the person's how do I put this? Um, Morality starts to become a bit more of a question mark, I guess. I don't know. Because I guess, if we look at sexual desire, why do I think that a driven driver in that type of a lust-filled situation could end up doing something illegal, immoral, etc.?
Well, that was exactly what I was thinking, that they might push themselves on someone else, but convince themselves that that person wanted it.
Exactly right. Where the driven expressive is going to be far more of the flirt.
Right.
Nothing overly aggressive or whatever. Actually, I'm sorry, the expressive driver would be more of the flirt. The driven expressive is just, living in the romance novel, if you will. So they're imagining it and thinking about it, but not necessarily engaged enough in the actual tasks that would lead to whatever. So I still believe that driven driver in their lust for money, their lust for power, their lust for whatever, they can cross a line into behaviors that would be immoral, unethical, illegal, criminal,
Mhm.
whatever the case may be. So, and certainly that can change. Brian, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the risk they take would be even greater out that far out grid.
And certainly we know that the further someone moves out grid, the more risk oriented they become. And people in the out grid danger zone tends to create risk where it doesn't really exist, sometimes purely to make things more interesting for them. So talking about stirring up trouble and believing the rules don't apply to you, again, that's not all driven driver energy. There's a healthy part of driven driver, but it's when it goes to their head. And that's where we have that issue. Now, this is going to come into play as we work our way through this. Well, let me draw a text box there. Oh, thank you.
You know what, Henry Kissinger once said that power was the, ultimate aphrodisiac, and power, sex, all of that. I think that all comes into play, and there's a shift to the limbic system, the emotional instinctual brain, where where we rationalize, and I always say rationalize is rational,
Lies.
lies,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we get into where there's no rational thinking, and it's just instinctual at that point, which has more energy than cognitive, you know um
Yes.
yeah, the executive decision maker, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
They're being driven by a very different
Yeah.
set of thoughts, set of feelings, and to your point, I'll throw it to Brian real quick, to a very different neurochemistry.
Right.
So what's happening, Brian, when we're this far out grid and this far up grid? What neurotransmitters are coming into play?
But that's the norepinephrine and the adrenaline. So when you're that far out grid or too far up grid, there is no rationalization. You're in amygdala hijacking state.
Mhm.
So you're literally riding the emotions and almost exclusively the emotions. Because if there were any rationalization in terms of the cortex, you would think about how to de-risk some of the behaviors. You still might take the high risk, but you'll at least consider that, okay, yeah, I'm way too far out there. So that's where serotonin and things will come in, because you'll start to reason with yourself as to why you're doing what you're doing. What is the worth of this?
Yeah, and just so you guys know, the PowerPoint deck I'm using is the same we've been using. We've been doing these calls now for a year. So I have every screen we've used for an entire year available all at once. And so it's interesting that if we go back, we could look at what's going on with the norepinephrine or the noradrenaline, and we can see the dopamine is kicking into. And we learned before that the thing that dopamine wants more than anything else is, other than Brian, who knows the answer. What does dopamine want? Dopamine wants
more dopamine.
More dopamine. More dopamine. And so there's not much serotonin going on. Trying to figure out what else we have happening here. I think we were also talking about the endorphins were coming into play. Yeah, so we got the endorphins, and yeah. So anyway, it's just quite the mix. And at a certain point, without making excuses, I'm sorry, I'm clicking around in a crazy kind of way, but I'm trying to find where I was. In a crazy kind of way, when you are a driven driver in the outgrid danger zone, do you believe that you are 100% in charge of your behavior then? Do you have that level of control, level of whatever, or has your neurochemical soup taken over? So not that I want anyone to be able to use that as justification in a courtroom for criminal behavior, but from a neurochemical perspective, is there any truth in that?
Yes.
I would think there's an illusion of control, I think, but I don't think it's actual reality, or it's your reality of the moment. But this is where people will say, they kind of snap out of it literally and say, oh my God, like I've lost control for a moment or something. I heard a psychologist say this one time, that is virtually impossible to be conscious and harm yourself. Like when you're taking that far risk, like you'll snap out of it just as you're about to cut yourself. You'll be like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah.
So it's like, again, when that system overrides your capacity to think about in terms of the cortex, the executive functionalities, when that system is overridden by emotions, that's when you can get in a heap of trouble.
Yeah. Yep. And so can anyone get away with saying dopamine made me do it?
Yeah, by reason of insanity.
Well, that's what I'm going like. So I'm glad you brought that up, because we hear those kinds of justifications. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. I was out of my mind. I mean, you hear all the excuses being presented as explanations. And I've always wondered, is there actually any neurochemical foundation on that? It doesn't excuse the behavior, make no mistake about that. But But at least you could go like, no, well, those certainly weren't helping change the behavior. So he's got a big old dose of adrenaline going on, norepinephrine, dopamine. What else is up there? The endorphin rush. So big endorphin rush going on. So, I get it. There could be a neurochemical component to it. But what made what happen? Did the attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, thoughts create the neurochemical soup? Or did the neurochemical soup create the behaviors? Or I'll bet Brian's going to say it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of both. Because think about it. If we're in lust for anything, it feels good, right? It doesn't feel bad necessarily.
No.
Like there's some kind of reward, there's some kind of incentive to keep doing what it is that you're doing or wanting what it is that you want.
Yep.
Something is driving that. And so it is a little bit of both. I remember as a foster parent having that conversation with one of the kids that came into my home because he came home with a hickey on his neck. And so I had to have a conversation with him that, did that feel good? And he says, well, yeah, it felt good. And I said, well, that's where you have to kick in and think about what it is that you're doing, because it could lead to other things that feel good. And then we'll be having a conversation about you have someone pregnant. So, that's just a real talk, because I had to explain to him that, okay, that felt good. But where was your thinking into, because it was something they could not hide, right? So it was that big.
Yeah, lovely. Right. Now, let me add one other thing to what's happening outgrid to this mix. One of the things that it said early on about the 7 deadly sins is that one can naturally lead to another. They end up being rather interconnected at a certain point in time. And so I wonder whether or not the lust that we are talking about when it comes to sexual desires and all that, when you're in the outgrid danger zone, is it really about lust, or is it now about power? So what's really driving it? The control over another person? What's really happening there? And so thoughts about that before we kind of throw on our next one, which will change the subject rather dramatically. Yep. Nope. Okay, fine. So the next one is gluttony. Gluttony. So gluttony is the overindulgence and overconsumption of anything to the point of waste. The word derives from the Latin gultire, to gulp down and swallow. One reason for its condemnation is that gorging by the prosperous may leave the needy hungry. The medieval church leaders, Thomas Aquinas as an example, took a more expansive view of gluttony, arguing that it could also include an obsessive anticipation of meals and overindulgence in delicacies or costly foods. And they came up with, Thomas Aquinas came up with 5 different forms of gluttony. They all have Latin names, doesn't matter, but they translate into eating too expensively, eating too daintily, eating too much, eating too soon, eating too eagerly. So there you go. And the last one, eating too eagerly, is the one that opens up the definition of gluttony beyond food, because it's the eagerness to have something. So the passion for a mere earthly pleasure, which can make the committer become impulsive. Reducing the goals of life to merely eating and drinking or consuming for the sake of consumption. Isn't that interesting? So gluttony is not just about food. It is about the overindulgence or overconsumption of anything to the point of waste. So can you guys give some examples of gluttony in some terms other than food? Anybody? Okay, he's a glutton for punishment. We've all heard that one. I
How
think that
about binge watching on, how about
there you go. Binge watching. Yeah.
on the streaming?
Binge watching TV. Yep, that could certainly be one of them. Overindulgence, overconsumption of something. So, I mean, obviously, most of it's going to be around the subject.
Ordering things on Amazon.
There you go. That's right. Conspicuous consumption. No, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely.
You know, it makes me think that these are things that are easy to do, so the challenge is low.
Yeah.
And the ability is high. So it makes me think it's down grid.
Right. So let's go.
Yeah, I was going to say like expressive analytical, maybe.
An expressive analytical. Let's see, an expressive analytical. Tell us about the expressive analytical energy around gluttony.
Well, I would think like if you're expressing gluttony, like you kind of know what you're doing, but you can reason or rationalize with yourself as to why you're doing it. Like think about like the example that Pam just gave about like I have 6 sisters who love to shop on Amazon, right? And so they'll say, yeah, I'm buying stuff because it's in season. But my question is, okay, is there a difference between your needs and wants?
Right.
Are you satisfying that? Because then their husbands are complaining, yeah, they bought, the mother load and I don't have any place to put it. And so they're, arguing about that. And so my thinking is, okay, they can analyze that, okay, maybe I am ordering too much, but they rationalize that I need it now because it's in season. I'm like, are they going to like run out?
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. Okay. So certainly I think that now you're talking about, well, first of all, when I look at the words overindulgence and overconsumption, it tells me that one way or another, this person has access to those resources.
Yeah.
So whether they have access to the food or access to the money to get the food, or they have access to the objects, or they have access to the money to get whatever those objects are, I think that Pamela's right that we're going to see someone who perceives themselves as having sufficient ability to support whatever the gluttonous behavior happens to be. Now, to what Brian was saying, if they're doing it because it feels good or it's social or it's some way they've got to justify, there could be an expressive element to that. But let's say that, let me give you guys a different scenario. You're still at a store back in the days when people would physically go to stores. And I don't know if you guys remember Filene's Basement. Anyone remember Filene's Basement? Okay. And Filene's...
It really dates us, doesn't it?
It does. But Filene's Basement, Brian, is that something you know about? Edie, I bet you know about Filene's Basement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my
All right.
gosh.
So Filene's Basement, the thing is that everything was based on a certain timing. So there was days or whatever where new stuff would be put out and when price reductions would occur. And so the Filene's Basement could be stormed with people who would bust through the doors. It's kind of like Black Friday, historically, Black Friday, where people, you don't really need this stuff. You don't want to, why are you even there? Because the discounts are going to be great. Yeah, but do you really need anything? Nevertheless, they are there willing to fight purely to be able to consume whatever it is that happens to be going on. Now, I bring that up because now I'm wondering whether or not there could also be a driven driver aspect to gluttony.
Yeah.
Now, I kind of like that the gluttony of the analytical energy may find itself very happy to do shopping online. Because look where they are. They're in power, apathy, and apathy. So that might not be as large of a font of gluttony. But when I think about gluttony seems to have a very strong driving force to make you want to overindulge or overconsume. So if you were apathetic about consumption, would you overeat, undereat, mindlessly eat? What do you guys think? So I guess when I'm down grid, I think the person is just munching out of habit.
Mindlessly.
Right.
mindlessly. You
Yeah.
know, it's a mistake to sit down binge watching Netflix with a gigantic bowl of popcorn in front of you.
Just doing it without thinking. Just
Yeah, you're not even thinking, you're not hungry. It's just this mindless kind of activity. For me, that would be peanut M&Ms, but that's a different story for a
For
different
me,
day.
it would be almond M&Ms.
Almond M&Ms, yeah, and I don't care
or
what size.
peanut butter.
Yeah, yeah. See, and for me,
Do
when it
you
comes to
do you
M&Ms,
have remorse after that?
only that I've run out.
Or for
That
me, it would be when I got on the scales, because I've lost a ton of weight, so I
Oh,
would be
good for you.
unhappy.
Yeah, you know, if it broke keto or something like that, yeah, I could see all that. But usually, I'm always disappointed when I eat my final M&M, and I've always believed that no matter what size the bag is, it is a single serving. And so, you know,
I
this
love
idea that it's
that.
going to wait for a day, yeah, okay, I know that number. They're trying to sell me an extended car warranty. Um, Okay, so gluttony, we could kind of talk a little bit more about it. So I think that there is kind of more of a conscious, deliberate form of gluttony, and then there is this kind of passive kind of gluttony. And so downgrid, I kind of feel like it's going to be more passive, and a little bit more up and out grid, I feel like it's going to become a little bit more deliberate. And I will share with you that when I'm not really watching my weight or whatever, back in the day, do you guys remember buffets? So when I would go to a buffet, to me, okay, Linda is a very conscientious eater. And so if you go to a buffet, Linda is going to go to the salad section. She's going to make herself a lovely little salad. And Linda, you're on, so you can unmute if you'd like to. She's very responsible and very thoughtful and all those kinds of things. So make the right salad and blah, blah, blah. Nope. The first thing I do is case out the entire buffet, and I start to create a map of what it is that I'm going to eat in what order. I'm a very analytical driver when it comes to my gluttony. So I don't see any point in filling valuable stomach space with stuff that is otherwise optional, lettuce being top on the list. So you know, that's just available. And I'm not a big sweet eater, so I don't really care all that much about the desserts. I'm drawn to the proteins. So yeah, so I'm going to, and I don't like the seafood, but you know, we were in Vegas and we went to one of the buffets, and it was interesting how there would be this whole flock of people looming around the seafood table, waiting for the next batch of crab legs to be dumped so they could all kind of devour it. Like, this is gluttony. This is calculated gluttony happening right here. So okay, so anyway,
So the passive gluttony person, would you say that would be the one that experienced like the regret of what they're doing, although they know what they're doing, as opposed to the driven one? I'm thinking like when remember the pandemic first started, and there was a story about a guy who filled his garage with toilet paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he literally filled, so he had to have known what he was doing, but he had this remorse after that. Like, what am I going to do with all of this toilet paper?
But he only had that remorse when he found out he was going to be forbidden to sell it, to resell it. Because remember these guys that bought up all the wipes and all the hand sanitizer and all the toilet paper, thinking they would be able to turn around and make a killing on Amazon. Well, that's this driven driver mindset around gluttony. So grab it all, and you'll find out as we get to the other deadly sins, one of them is greed. And so that'll be giving a little appearance as well.
So, you know, I'm thinking of the extreme on gluttony being hoarding.
Yeah, hoarding. And when I think about that, okay, first of all, I think we know that hoarding is a self-soothing behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So one way or another, it's helping the person to increase their perception of control, at least in that moment. Well, I'm still feeling that that expressive analytical or analytical driver mindset coming into play, maybe driven analytical, where they're just kind of going like, I might need this someday. I'm not going to throw it away. It's like, and I can tell you that I believe that everybody suffers from it to a certain degree. And I'll give you a perfect example from my own like, and I'm going to generalize this to all the guys I've ever known have this thing in common. We would never dream of throwing away a spare screw. So, or a little washer or one little nail or whatever it is. It's like you might need that someday. And so everybody has in their garage or their workshop some place where there are all these stray random nails and screws and bolts and whatever it all happens to be, because why would we ever throw that away?
Yes.
So when Linda and I moved from North Carolina to the West Coast, we decided to just, sell virtually everything that we didn't want to lug around. I was selling that stuff at a garage sale by the pound. So, and I will tell you, not a single woman even looked at it. So, but these guys were going like, you can buy random hardware pieces by the pound. Oh, how many pounds do you have? How many pounds? It was kind of sick in many ways, but there's that. So when I put like gluttony around these three, I do believe that there is an expressive analytical, an analytical driver, a driven analytical, and all of these may have some gluttony, but it's more calculated. It is more thoughtful. Where the analytical's gluttony, deep down in apathy, in the downgrade danger zone of apathy, I think they're totally on autopilot. And to your point, Brian, I don't think they have any regret whatsoever, because I don't think they really noticed it. I think they're just oblivious to what's going on. So they collect things just because they were too lazy to throw anything away, and it doesn't bother them, kind of, etc. So yeah. Anyway, other thoughts about gluttony, overindulgence, overconsumption of anything to the point of waste. Yeah. Okay. I think we got time to at least introduce a third one, which, handily enough, happens to be greed. Boy, all these words they come up with, okay, here's a new one for you. So greed is also known as avarice, cupidity. I've never heard of that. Cupidity. Covetousness, yes, is like lust and gluttony, a sin of desire. However, greed is applied to an artificial, rapacious desire and the pursuit of material possessions. So Thomas Aquinas wrote, greed is a sin against God, just as all mortal sins, inasmuch as man condemns things eternal for the sake of temporal things. In Dante's Purgatory, the penitents are bound and laid face down on the ground for having concentrated excessively on earthly thoughts. So the hoarding of materials or objects, theft and robbery, especially by means of violence, trickery, or manipulation of authority, are all actions inspired by greed. So there you go. Avarice. Greed plunges a man deep into the mire of this world so that he makes it to be his God. So their material wealth is what it's really all about. So like pride, greed can lead to not just some, but to all forms of evil. All right. Where do you want to plop greed? Anybody? Where do you want to put greed?
I think that would have to be downgrade, maybe.
All right, let me copy something. Where might greed live?
I would think the ability to, I don't think you're going to pursue greed if the challenge is too high. Like you'll check out, because greed, you'll want to stick with that.
All right, what's that
so
movie?
I think
Anyone remember?
It would be somewhere downgrade.
Anyone remember the movie with Michael Douglas? Won a whole bunch of awards, but his big line, I think it was Wall Street.
Wall Street, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And
the trading one?
Where he said greed.
Yeah, Wall Street, exactly.
Greed is good. Greed is good. And so I do think there's probably a high level of risk-related behavior they're willing to take. The question is, do people of that mindset view risk-taking behavior and a high level of challenge? Or do they think that they have enough ability to meet that challenge, and so it doesn't feel, they're not up in stress about it, they're not even in power stress about it, they're very much on top of it? Does
Yeah, I'm
that feel
thinking,
right?
on Wall Street, that made me think about, people who get into the market and they just stay with it,
Hmm.
hang in there. They don't read the signs. They don't see what's happening. They just keep going for it, going for it. I happen to know someone who lost everything they had
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
that.
yeah. We've known a couple of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we go, is there a difference between the greed we would find out grid? I think we're all in agreement that greed lives there as well. Greed might also be a little bit more up grid. Maybe I want to put it more
Hmm.
here, because an expressive driver could also be there. But this greed downgrid to me feels more like, who's the character from Christmas Carol? Ebenezer Scrooge, the miserly greed, hanging on with tight fists
Oh yeah, to
Hmm.
everything he has. Yeah.
to everything that
Hmm.
he has. So that's kind of greed, but he didn't seem very risk oriented at all. He seemed very risk averse. So maybe that's what we're talking
Hmm.
about. You get something and you hold on to it indefinitely, which would resonate with what they've said about hoarding, theft, and robbery. Now, theft and robbery by means of violence, trickery, or manipulation, that's more of an upgrade kind of a thing, because you got to
Hmm.
really know what you're doing to pull those things off. So
I
I
wonder if
guess,
there's a little bit of fear of missing out too that plays
yeah.
into that. When you think about a person who tries to do everything or get involved in everything or participate in everything,
Mhm.
yeah, I can see a relationship to that of, you know, um, I'm off the stock market now, but
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and so,
they're greedy for experiences or something.
yeah, and see, now
Hmm.
to me that
Yep.
feels like a little bit more of the lust kind of thing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. In fact, they
Maybe the,
said that's two of the emotions uh, that govern the market is greed and fear, is what you hear financial gurus talk about all the time. And so that what Pam was just describing, that idea of missing out, like they actually send this, like this is the newest technology coming out, you want to get in on this stock right away. There's companies
mhm.
that market heavily based on that.
Yeah, I don't want to lose out. In fact, I'm going to change this then to what she said, FOMO.
or people that keep buying the newest phone and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
a person they have a perfectly good phone, but the new one is out. They have to have the new one. Stand in
Hmm.
line
Yeah,
to get it. Yeah.
That's right.
exactly.
So here we have
Exactly.
greed, miserly. My Ley, miserly, Ly,
Yeah.
miserly. But how are we characterizing this greed we found in the Wall Street people? I mean, it kind of, we put it here, it's greed and lust kind of just put together.
Yeah. I
Right.
think
So,
so.
Right.
mhm, yeah. And then greed. Yeah, then down here it's going to progress then from the greed that is about accumulation to the greed that is about holding on
Yeah.
to something.
Yeah. So the fear of missing out is going for stuff, trying to gather, garner the stuff.
Yeah,
Greed is, yeah,
yeah. This is the acquisition part of greed,
acquisition part of it. And then
and then this is the
miserly, the
hanging
hanging
on.
on. It's just
Right.
very interesting.
Yeah, isn't it though? Now I'm kind of wondering if there is a difference in the greed we find in the analytical driver, because the analytical driver would be more likely to go, I got it. I don't want to lose it. I've got
Mm.
it. I want to protect it. So that to me seems a little bit more well, how do I put this? Anyone who's going to be handling our personal finances, I'd like them to have that thought. We've accumulated what we've accumulated. Please don't mess with it. Please don't. Please
So,
don't.
Mhm.
yeah, protective.
Yeah, it's a protective kind of a thing. Yeah, where down here miserly means, you're going to rob yourself of any experience, whatever, because that's my thoughts. Like up here, you want to be thoughtful around how you're going to
Yeah.
use your resources. Where down here, you're terrified to use. Terrified isn't
You
the right
don't even
word, but
use them.
you
I
don't
mean,
use your resources.
I won't say who, but I know somebody has a ton of money and lives very poor.
Yes,
They live like they're poor.
that's
I
right.
mean, not just frugal, but I mean, they live like they're poor.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Well, in fact, that was kind of like a big hallmark of Tony Hsieh. Obviously, he had other problems that, uh, resulted in his death. But you guys all know who Tony Hsieh is?
I don't.
He's the guy.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the guy who started Zappos.
Oh,
And so here he is, a young man, created this concept for people. I think initially it was just about shoes, and very, very successful, made a real fortune. Well, his two big claims to fame was that he was in Silicon Valley somewhere, I think San Francisco proper, in fact, but he acquired some land, and on this land, the only thing you could put were trailers. Not like mobile homes. I'm talking about like Airstream trailers. And
uh-huh.
he lived in an Airstream trailer, and I'm sure it was very nice, make no mistake about it, but nevertheless, he died in a fire just a handful of months ago because he became addicted to inhalants. And he was in, I figure, somewhere along the East Coast with friends, but he loved candles and he loved these highly flammable inhalant. I don't know what to even call them. Brian, you're the doctor, but
Like the vape things?
no, not like vape, like smoking, but more like you're inhaling um, solvents.
Oh,
So
okay. Like
those
glue,
Yeah.
like a
glue,
glue
Yeah.
and
a
stuff like
glue
that.
high or whatever, and
Yeah.
one way or another,
Yeah.
he lost conscious. This is what they're assuming. He lost consciousness, hit a candle, and these vapors are very flammable to begin with,
And they blew. Yeah, they
and
blew.
that blew,
Yeah.
and he died of smoke inhalation and whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite a shame. But my point is that he didn't seem particularly all that greedy. Um, but he didn't live long enough, I think, for us to understand what he was trying to do with his resources. But he lived a very simple sort of life. Yeah, so
Mhm.
there it goes.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
thinking the person I'm thinking of passed on buying a can of green beans because the price went up from 50 cents to 58 cents
wow.
on the generic brand at Walmart. Yeah.
Oh, why does that sound like who's our guy that's the head of that investment firm who still lives in the same house he's always lived in?
Warren
Oh,
Buffett.
Warren
Warren
Buffett.
Buffett.
One of
Yeah.
the, I mean, he's very, I don't think he's frugal to that point, but yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
don't know what his house that he's always lived in looks like. Maybe it was great to start with.
Oh, no, it's a nice big family house, but you're only talking about like a normal neighborhood family house.
Oh,
And
okay.
he grew up in it, or his early adult years were in it, but he's never changed his household ever. So and his
Yeah.
whole thought is like, well, it's plenty big enough for whatever. And he raised his family there and on and on. So,
So for a
hopefully,
person like him, in terms of where this protective is that really a form of greed per se? Because I'm thinking like a Warren Buffett, like you said, he's a
yeah,
billionaire. I think his
yeah,
house was built to like 1958. He's not leaving any inheritance for his kids. He
right.
always just wants to live a simple life, and
Yeah,
that's his investment philosophy.
he gives away and he seems pretty happy guy. I think he loves the challenge of investing and
Yeah,
making money, but I don't think he does it for greed. I mean, just
No.
from what I've read about him.
Yep.
because
No,
I'm
But
he,
actually
he
a
does do a
Berkshire
lot of
Hathaway shareholder.
yeah, he does a
Hmm.
lot of good in the world.
yep, he certainly
Right,
does.
right.
So in fact, I'll just go ahead and slide this in so you can see. Oh, come on, Pinterest, show it. Oh, I just hate it when they make you jump through all kinds of hoops to look at a silly photograph. This is what I want. You, double click. Oh, now you're over here. How anything but helpful. Okay. So there you go. So it's a
Oh,
nice
there we go.
house. It's a
Oh,
nice
yeah.
house, but it's no big mansion or anything.
Well, it looks kind of mansion-like to somebody who lives in a small place.
Well, I guess, yeah, but
1,000 square feet, or some of the newer, 600 square feet apartments.
yeah, that are
They
still,
would consider that a mansion.
yeah, they would. I think too, we're going to be exploring this when we look at the virtues, but the opposite of greed is charity.
Mhm.
And so I think that explains a lot of the
Ah.
behavior that we find in the super rich that have some sort of, what do we say, some sort of moderating value set that just says it's not
Yeah.
about just accumulating wealth and gold plating everything and all that sort of stuff. It really is about what can these resources do to impact humanity or to, whatever. That's a
Might
bit so.
relate to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Well, exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, and I think that's why this shows, I think I like this because it shows the behavioral continuum that you can experience any of these at any given point in time. Like it's not
Mhm.
just one thing, because like a person like Warren Buffett, his whole philosophy is about he only invests in things he understands. This man is near 90 years old,
Mhm, mhm.
and he really protects his decision making and all those kinds of things. And that's why he's been as successful as he's been. But
Yep.
he strategized, he's very deliberate with that.
Yep. And so, you go like, all right, well, there is probably a strong level of desire that he has and has always had to do what he does. But whatever his driver force is, he's not out here in lust and greed and gluttony and all that. Somehow or another, he's a gentler version of these things, an amiable driver, maybe a balanced
Yeah.
driver energy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Something like that.
Somewhere right
He's
in
not out
there.
here. Right. And so it'll be interesting when we look at the continuum. And well, again, I've already said that the opposite of greed is charity. Well, where is charity at its strongest place on the grid? And then can we draw a line of continuum between where we see greed and where we see charity and see how that helps us to better understand what's going on in these more healthy spots on the change grid? Yeah. Anywho, that's our time for today. So hopefully you guys are finding this an interesting angle to look at. Yeah.
I just
Very
realized how much
interesting.
I've missed being here, and
Well,
you
and
know,
we've missed having you. So please
Yeah.
join us.
Exactly.
Please join us.
Very good to hear you.
Yeah.
it was really great fun today. Thank you, T.
All right. Well, we'll pick up where we left off on Thursdays.
Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.